everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory. Today, it's going to be a soft spoken case, and it's going to have some background noises because farm life, I guess, and that's what I get for recording during the day. But I wanted to share with you this case that is known as the homeschoolers. If you're new to my channel, please check out my Patreon page with 4 extra videos for $5 a month. Also, if you enjoy the mix of true crime and ASMR, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment down below. Now, Larry and Carrie had 7 children of their own, but they wanted more. I can totally relate. But her last pregnancy had left Carrie Williams unable to have more children. At the time, it was kind of a trend for homeschooling evangelical Christians in the mid-2000s to adopt kids, even when they already had big families. It was kind of the idea of rescuing kids that needed a good home, and then homeschool them according to their conservative Christian curriculum, if you want to call it that. Other families that they knew from Bible study groups and their church had adopted as many as 8 children. And Carrie, with her husband Larry, wanted to do it too. Larry Williams worked from noon until midnight as a millwright for Boeing. Carrie stayed at home to homeschool her children and to raise the family. At the time, Carrie had attended a women's retreat. It was called a Bob Ruby's. I have a very hyper puppy around me. During the retreat, they talked about adopting kids from Liberia, which is a West African country that experiencing some political issues and multiple civil wars. So in the year 2008, the family contacted Adoption Advocates International, or AAI. that is located or was located in Port Angeles, Washington. For those of you that are fans of Twilight, you kind of know where that is. And this was not church based. It was run by this lady by the name of Meryl Ripley. And she had 20 children. 17 of those were adopted. When they talked to Meryl, she explained that there were 2 orphaned children in Ethiopia that needed a loving home. They were special needs, or one child was deaf, and Carrie knew American Sign Language way before she got married, so it seemed like the perfect match. To prepare for this adoption, they took a home study course provided by the agency and filled out paperwork. The company or the agency missed the fact that Carrie left one section of the paperwork blank. If you're wondering what that section is where you put your beliefs on child discipline. In the months leading up to the adoption, Carrie and Larry saw a 1-minute video of these kids crying and begging really for a loving home. It was so sad. Immanuel, who was 7 years old and deaf, and Hannah, who was 11 and was kind of underweight. She was about 77 pounds. They were both living at this orphanage in the Ethiopian capital city of Addis Ababa, and they were both abandoned at an early age. However, they were not related, but very excited to become brother and sister, living in no other country but the United States. The new parents lived in the Pacific Northwest, in the country, and Hannah was reading Little House on the Prairie series in preparation for the new life. In the months after Hannah and Immanuel arrived in the year 2008, the Williams' post-adoption reports came to AAR. Yes, it's normal, and it is agreed and signed on the initial agreement. Everything in the reports seemed normal. Hannah had filled out to a healthier 105-pound girl. But in June of 2009, the reports stopped. this was not supposed to happen. They needed to continue to send reports throughout the children's lives. But there were no legal obligations to file these reports. So the adoption agency had no way of knowing what was really going on in the Williamses' household. The part that they left blank was actually the most important and the most telling out of any other section that they filled on those paperworks in the beginning. Larry and Carrie Williams believed in a strict fundamentalist Christian lifestyle. Almost all television and internet access was forbidden. They couldn't wear pants, only skirts if they were girls, or dresses, and never swimsuits. And they would certainly not allowed to vote. They were never out in public, and only socialize with a few select like-minded church families. Larry regularly preached to the children in the backyard of their rural 5-acre property. They also were based on this book called To Train Up a Child by Michael and Debbie Pearl, which taught the principles and techniques for training an animal and raising a child were the same. So they were supposed to spank their children within the first few months of birth to break their will. The argument for beating a child in this book came straight from his interpretation of the Bible. In Proverbs 13:24, it reads, "He that spareth his rod hateth his son," which translated to them, a child properly and timely spanked is healed in the soul and restored to wholeness of spirit. A child can be turned back from the road to hell through proper spanking. End quote. The book was, in my opinion, kind of creepy. It went into great details of using a wooden spoon, which I might add, I know a few families that still use this method. Apparently it was a popular book. Some other people, this one I've never heard of, but used a short, small plastic plumbing tubing. It was kind of very close to the parents at all times. You did something wrong, then they would spank you with that. in the book also covers how you have to kind of hide food and put children under a cold outdoor garden hose as punishment. Now, don't get me wrong, this book, as crazy as it sounds to me in particular, it was extremely popular with fundamentalist Christians. And it sold almost 700,000 copies in the first 7 years of its publication. For the next 2 years, Hannah's hopes of the American dream were quickly crushed. This was nothing like Little House on the Prairie. Within months after Hannah arrived, she had her period for the first time. And this made Carrie very upset, and she shared it during a knitting group that she wanted a little girl, not a half-grown woman. She would complain about Hannah being rebellious, and she would even say, quote, "I wouldn't wish her on anyone." Friends, neighbors noticed that Hannah and Immanuel were not really present. They would never go to family outings, holidays, or even to church. And every time they would bring them to church, Carrie made sure that nobody who knew sign language would try to talk or communicate with Immanuel. The neighbors even noticed the 7 kids would be playing outside together, while Hannah and Immanuel would be left standing alone near the driveway, looking down and being sad. At home, the discipline was much worse. Hannah had hepatitis B, who really, this made Carrie so mad at her and accused her of purposely smearing blood on the bathroom walls. So Hannah was not allowed to use the bathroom in the house, and she'd have to go outside to this portable toilet behind the barn that they would only empty twice a year. She was not allowed to shower inside either, so she had to go outside and use the garden hose. And she kind of made this routine where she would go to the front, prop the garden hose with sticks, and take a shower. Now, Hannah was also often often forced to use this, I don't even know how to call it, but this setup in front of the other children. If it was cold, they'd be inside looking outside the window. Now, Carrie picked her clothes, and every time Hannah would comment about it, she would lose the right to wear it. So she was only given a towel to wear for the day. Hannah was very proud of her long braided hair. And Carrie knew she loved her hair. The first spring of Hannah's new life, she was told to cut the grass in the yard. When she finished, the grass was cut shorter than Carrie had wanted it. So as a punishment, Carrie shaved her head. This was not the only time. She did it in 3 different occasions. Now, these punishments began immediately after adoption. Most of the time, Immanuel and Hannah had no idea why they were being punished. It could have been for standing in the wrong place, or making a mistake in their schoolwork. A few months after arriving, traumatized by the change of environment and daily punishments, Immanuel began wetting the bed. Carrie and Larry were convinced that he was doing that on purpose, just to make them angry. So they decided to take him outside and give him a short shower with a very cold hose. Then they sent him to sleep in the dark shower room. Carrie often teased him by running the plastic tubing she called her switch up and down his face. In one occasion, Larry actually hit him on the top of the head with his fist, so hard that caused blood to run down his face. So that night, they made him sleep outside and kept apart from the rest of the other kids. I mean, this was all based on that book. And the plastic tubing was kind of the image of this book. Carrie kept it in her bra. Sometimes it was one of Larry's belts folded in half. I mean, they were just punishing them for what they believed was wrong. They would deny them food, clothes, forced them to sleep outside, take cold showers. And if you're wondering about the rest of the kids, their biological children, they were punished too, but never as bad as HANA and Immanuel. They were fed different meals than the biological children. For example, they would have sandwiches while HANA and Immanuel would have the same sandwich, but with a glass of water poured over the sandwich. They would also get cold leftovers with unheated frozen vegetables. They could never eat at the table. They needed to go eat outside, no matter how cold it was, if it was raining or even snowing. Because of Hannah's period, Larry and Carrie took the initial steps to change her official age. The plan was to bump up a few years so they could kick her out of the house sooner. When another member of the knitting group asked how the girl would survive in the outside world, Carrie said, quote, "It wouldn't be my problem," end quote. In the 3 years that Hannah lived with this family, she went from sleeping alone in the barn behind the house to being locked inside a bathroom with no light, to eventually being kept in a 4-foot by 2-foot closet for up to 24 hours. Larry would record Bible sermons and religious music played outside of the closet the entire time, so she couldn't or wouldn't be able to sleep. Now, fast forward to the afternoon of Wednesday, May 11, 2011, so 10 years ago, almost to the day, when Carrie sent Hannah into the backyard as one of her daily punishments. It was a rainy spring day in the mid-40s, and Hannah was wearing shorts and a t-shirt. When she complained of being cold, Carrie told her to do jumping jacks to stay warm. After a few hours alone outside, the children noticed Hannah's lower lip quivering. She had fallen a few times, and at one point she couldn't get up. Carrie went out the back door and grabbed Hannah by the arm and led her to the outhouse behind the barn. Hannah would continue to fall repeatedly, which made Carrie even more angry. Carrie thought that Hannah was only trying to get attention. So eventually she left her puppy nightmares alone in the yard on the floor. Hours later, Hannah's clothes were soaked. Carrie set dry clothes on the back porch and yelled at her to come back inside the house. Hannah wouldn't move. So Carrie called her two eldest sons. She gave the boys a length of plastic tubing and told them to hit her on her bottom for not following her orders. The boys started to do that. She started to remove her own clothing. So Carrie called the boys back inside. By 5 p.m., Hannah began throwing herself down on the pavement, gravel, driveway, and even the grass. Her knees and hands began to get bloody and scratches everywhere. And Carrie would watch from inside the house. When she couldn't watch anymore, Carrie turned away from the window and ignored Hannah for the rest of the evening. Near midnight, the 7 biological children, they were giggling and looking out the window at Hannah. She had removed all of her clothing and was still uncontrollably throwing her body around in a fit. She was pounding her head into the ground, and they found this very funny. But she was actually experiencing what's known as paradoxical undressing. This is something that you experience in the final stages of hypothermia. The nerves can become damaged, causing irrational behavior. So the final stage of hyperthermia tricks the mind into thinking it's extremely hot, causing the person to remove the clothes and attempt to burrow themselves into the ground. When Hannah finally stopped moving, one of the daughters called their mother to come check on her. At this point, she was face down in the yard with a mouth full of mud. So Carrie grabbed a bedsheet and wrapped it around Hannah and dragged her inside the house. She then called her husband, who was driving home from work, and then she called 911. She said, quote, "I think my daughter just killed herself. She's really rebellious, and she's been outside, refusing to come in. She's been throwing herself all around, and then she collapsed." She told the 911 operator that she was not breathing. And when she was asked how old was her daughter, she said she didn't know, but they adopted her 3 years ago. Now, The 911 operator could not believe it. How is it possible that you don't know how old your daughter is? To what Carrie started saying that she believed she was between 14 and 16, and moved on to explain that she was throwing herself all over the gravel, the yard, the patio, that she was trying to bring her inside the house, but that she ended up taking her clothes off. During the call, Carrie sounded more annoyed than shocked or scared. The operator coached her to do CPR, but Hannah was gone. She had a large lump on her forehead, and when it was actually over, when the emergency crews arrived, they couldn't believe really the many injuries that she had. Her hips, knees, elbows, face, everything was red, bloody. She had also a stomach infection. And later on, the autopsy revealed she was abnormally thin for just 13 years old. She was only 5 feet tall, and she went down 76 pounds. The official cause of death was hypothermia, compounded by malnutrition, a stomach infection, and that her body was too thin to retain enough heat on the day she died. Finally, Child Protective Services went to the Williams' home the next day. Larry refused to let them in. But 2 weeks later, the entire family were interviewed by a detective in Child Protective Services. The children would all repeat the same story. Hannah was rebellious and possessed by demons. But when Immanuel was interviewed, he told detectives, people like Hannah get spankings for lying and go into the fires of hell. When Larry heard Immanuel give that answer, he immediately stopped the interview and took the children home. 2 months had gone by with no charges brought against them, when Child Protective Services received an anonymous tip saying that Carrie didn't like her adopted children and that Immanuel was being treated much like Hannah. They opened a formal investigation, and all 8 of the children were taken into foster care. They got a search warrant, and they found the book To Train Up a Child, and they continued to interview the children repeatedly. Immanuel was afraid of his foster parents and was nervously apologized for every single thing he thought it was a mistake. He even would ask his foster mom why she wasn't beating him. He was in therapy, and he told several occasions about nightmares and being worried about dying soon. So he was diagnosed with PTSD. And that September, more than 4 months after Hannah's death, Carrie and Larry Williams were arrested on charges of homicide by abuse and first-degree manslaughter for the death of Hannah, as well as first-degree assault of a child for the abuse of Immanuel. They were facing a life sentence. Both posted bail of $150,000, but were given strict orders not to contact each other or any of the kids. However, when Larry continued to send highlighted Bible verses to the children, the prosecution believed them to be coded messages encouraging them to come to his defense. So he was arrested again and placed in a state jail where he stayed for almost 2 years waiting for his trial. Sadly, this wasn't the first time that this book had been linked to a child's death. 2 other sets of fundamental Christian parents had used these tactics described in the book and actually killed their adopted children. Sean Paddock and Lydia Schatz. 3 deaths happened in different parts of the United States, but they were all adopted, homeschooled, and beaten with a length of a 1/4-inch plastic tubing, as recommended by the book. Seven-year-old Lydia Schatz's parents, Kevin and Elizabeth, held her down and beat her for 9 hours with a piece of the tubing for pronouncing the word "bold" incorrectly. 4-year-old Sean Paddock's mother, Lynn Paddock, smothered him in a blanket wrapped too tightly around him because she wanted to stop him from getting out of bed in the middle of the night. So the abuse killed his children. At trial, Carrie and Larry turned on each other. They sat on opposite tables in the courtroom. They wouldn't look at each other. Larry testified that the discipline was all Carrie, and Carrie testified that it was all Larry. Carrie also admitted that she told her children not to talk to detectives about any of the abuse. But the children testified that lying was considered one of the most serious offenses in their household. One of their children, Joshua, confirmed that Hannah had not been homeschooled or eaten meals with the other children for at least a year before her death. He told the court that she would sometimes go 2 days without anyone speaking to her, and none of the biological children liked her. It really didn't make a difference because the rest of the time she was inside the closet. Immanuel testified using sign language. The courtroom was silent as he was asked what he thought happened to Hannah. And he sighed, "I don't know. She disappeared. I think maybe she's dead." He also testified that he was often beaten with a stick or plastic tubing until blood ran down his face. Quote, "I would suffer with the pain until it eventually went away." End quote. The biological children admitted they were coached to tell the authorities that Hannah slept in the bedroom with them, but she actually slept in the closet. They brought pictures of this closet and pictures of the scars on Hannah's body, and Larry testified that he trusted his wife's discipline choices with the adopted children because she had done such a good job raising the other ones. But Carrie would say that that was not true, that he was the one with the discipline, and he was the one behind all these methods. She also said that Larry was the one that installed the lock on the closet door. During the trial, the defense attempted to argue that Hannah was actually 16 years old, not 13. And if that was true, at the time of her death, if she was 16, the homicide by abuse charge could not be applied, as it only applies to children younger than 16. There was no birth certificate from Ethiopia that proved her age either way. So they postponed the trial to get Hannah's body exhumed for examination. The tests were inconclusive, and they really couldn't confirm that she was 16. The defense actually agreed that they were bad parents, that they made bad choices, but they were not killers, and they had no idea that that discipline would lead to the child's death. After 7 weeks of testimony, the jury didn't agree with the defense, so the Williamses were convicted of first-degree manslaughter and first-degree assault. Carrie was also found guilty of homicide by abuse and was sentenced to 37 years in prison. Larry got 28, and they gave him credit for the almost 2 years he had been in jail awaiting trial. Now, this case really is one of those themes, if you want to call it that, I really don't like to cover that much. when I comment the turbines, it was one of those cases that got requested so often that I felt like I had to cover it. In this case was something I was talking to somebody being from the Pacific Northwest and being somewhat of a recent quote unquote recent case. It's still very alive in people's minds and hearts. And being a Christian, and sometimes you get those looks or people believing that just because you live in the country or you homeschool your kids or you have lots of children, you follow the same standards in parenting, discipline, and what's expected. And that's not the true for everyone. If I had to do it all over, I would have moved to the country when my kids were younger. If I could go back, I would definitely homeschool them. And if I could go back in time and have more of a dedicated life to homeschooling, to my children, I definitely would have had more kids. Now, I don't believe in this discipline way. I don't believe in pushing kids to follow your personal religious beliefs. And I certainly would never, ever treat an adopted kid differently from my own. If I'm gonna do it, then I need to understand that there are no differences. So all that goes to say that I hope after sharing these cases with you that cover this kind of theme, and they share a lot of the same backgrounds and everything. I hope that you don't get the wrong idea. No, I don't believe that people that adopt children do this to them. No, I don't believe that everyone out there is trying to discipline their children the way that this family did. I think that I'm trying to say that we should all respect each other's preferences as far as raising a family. Hope agrees with me in her nightmare. But we also owe it to each other to keep an eye out for other kids around us in our communities. If the neighbors were close enough to see that the biological children were playing in the front yard and not the adopted ones, I would think that they'd be able to see little Hannah taking showers in the cold in the front yard. If she was so much time, outside during the cold weather, I think that if you see that, you can notice something wrong. That really is not about judging people's ways of discipline, but in this case, I can see a clear line that is being broken in the name of religion, but really in the mind of sick individuals who use religion and a book as an excuse to do this, because I don't believe that a person in their right mind, that a good human being can do what this couple did to these children and live with themselves. It takes a different kind of person to be able to sleep at night knowing what they were doing to these children. These cases make me mad more than anything. They upset me because I think as a child you're looking for that adult, that figure that you expect for protection and love and care from, and that same person becoming the one that will make you suffer even more than when you were abandoned in an orphanage. To me, that leaves me really speechless. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think it's weird that people homeschool? Do you find it creepy when you know somebody homeschools and lives in the country, or when they have too many children? I'm asking that question as the Josh Duggar thing is kind of erupting again for something terrible he did. But do you believe that this is true for all big families? I told you what I believe. Please share what you believe. Thanks for being here today. Everyone is kind of loud here at the farm, so I will talk to you next time. Good night.